Linda Jakobson, thank you so much for joining us today on My Security TV. This is a review of your essay in the Australian Foreign Affairs 14th edition, and Unfinished Business, Xi's Obsession with Taiwan. And you're also the founding director and deputy chair with China Matters. So your essay means a lot, and it's obviously quite a long essay too. It's very informative. There's about 4 or 5 areas I wanted to cover, but we've just interviewed Hugh White as well on his essay. And it's the two together are quite unique in the way that's been presented. But the world has changed even since this edition has come out and you've written the essay. And I think that's where the real value of this kind of thinking is. What's your current take on the situation and where China is sitting with Russia, and whether this changes your thinking at all? Does it cement it? How does that influence your current status?
Well, Chris, a pleasure to be speaking with you. Let me start unpacking that very complex question which you just posed, from directly addressing the question about whether the Ukraine crisis can be compared to anything what the Taiwan crisis could one day be. It's been speculated in the media quite a lot over the last week that we should look very carefully at the Ukraine crisis. It could be very similar the day when Xi Jinping starts making a decisive move toward reunification of the mainland and Taiwan. I disagree that two far-reaching parallels should be drawn. And there's one very major reason for that. Already when Putin was amassing his troops at the border of Ukraine, the United States president came out very clearly and said, the United States is not going to send troops into Ukraine to defend Ukraine. Now, in a Taiwan crisis, if there were signs that Xi Jinping was now going to make his move and decisively want to see what he calls progress toward reunification, the United States president, regardless of who is in the White House, will not, in that clear-cut, candid manner, say that the United States will not send troops to defend Taiwan. There are many reasons for this. Taiwan to the United States is a very special relationship. There's something called the Taiwan Relations Act. Though there's nothing in the text, which is often actually misunderstood by a lot of media reports, there's nothing in the text that absolutely obligates the United States to send troops to defend Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act does obligate the United States to assist Taiwan in defending itself. Ever since the People's Republic of China and the United States formed diplomatic relations in 1979, and the United States agreed to cut relations, diplomatic official relations with Taiwan, there's been this not an unambiguous, excuse me.
It is ambiguous, correct.
There's been this ambiguous stance of the United States, and that's been very intentional so that the PRC does not know, will the United States come militarily to Taiwan's defense. So there's a huge difference with Ukraine right there. There's a very close relationship between Taiwan and the United States, despite the fact that since 1979, they haven't had official diplomatic relations. They have unofficial political relations, which during the Trump 4 years were strengthened in very innovative ways. They've obviously got very close societal people-to-people relations. I mean, a lot of the middle class and, generally speaking, educated Taiwanese are educated in the United States, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of green card holders among Taiwanese, and there's a lot of dual citizenships.
It does put you in slight contrast to Hugh, where he sort of suggests that the US is weak in terms of its potential protection of Taiwan. The only other thing I wanted to raise around that with the comparison, because you actually mentioned Ukraine, ironically, in your, well, not ironically, on purpose, actually, in terms of this, and way before, I think it was around November, Ukraine sort of started to come onto the horizon. So I don't know whether you saw that early, but you do mention Ukraine in their shift in 1988. But the other one was the number of countries. If we look at what's happened with Ukraine and the sort of the Western global sort of recognition of Ukraine, whereas Taiwan doesn't quite have that. There's still the one China recognition. So that's a bit of a contrast I noticed in this one as well. Does Taiwan have yet the global recognition as a sovereign country?
Officially, and this is a very good point, and I just want to say, though, to your mention of Hugh, Hugh is a good friend. He's also on the Advisory Council of China Matters.
China Matters, so I noticed, yes.
Very heavy China Matters focused issue in the Australian Foreign Affairs. I'm not saying that I am convinced that the United States in its present state would come militarily to the defense of Taiwan. My point, just because there, I think I'm more agreeing with Hugh, perhaps not quite as pessimistic as Hugh, but I do think it's a big question. Is the US public willing to see body bags? Because their president has yet again committed the United States to defending a country. But to your question, officially, Taiwan only has, in addition to the Holy See, 14 countries that officially recognize it, and they're all tiny in Central and South America or in the South Pacific. So they're really not very substantially important nations on the international arena, yes, on the international arena. But what has been very interesting is that because of the way Trump has, or it wasn't actually, I always say it really wasn't Donald Trump. I think it was very much in this case his administration went about strengthening the notion of Taiwan as a normal country, and in very innovative ways forged relationships on behalf of or helping Taiwan to do so. There are many countries now who are much more openly supportive of Taiwan as a democracy. So they've approached this support for Taiwan that we need to support the fellow democracy. And as you know, Chris, at the moment, that's sort of a new line among leaders in the Indo-Pacific, that we fellow democracies must all band together. We must stand up to autocracy. And Taiwan was even invited to Biden's Democracy Summit in Washington, D.C. Yeah. So that while there's not formal recognition like there was for Ukraine, or is for Ukraine, I should say, in the same way, I do think that if there was an attack by the PRC on Taiwan, there would be a rallying among especially democracies in support of Taiwan.
There's a couple of ways I want to take that. One is the Greater Chinese Union, the way you sort of provide an avenue of this coming about. But I think that shift, and it's only been over, as you say, since the Trump period, the shift towards recognition of Taiwan is almost poking China back, and it may well get them to change their thinking as well, which might bring on the timeline. And I think the main thing that's in contestation at the moment is the timeline. You know, Xi's made it quite clear that he wants that reunification. And I like the way you've explained the language differences on the two sides. But it's one of those things where the timeline is, it's set. The destiny is set. Would you kind of agree to that regardless, Taiwan is going to have or sort out its relationship with China eventually? There is a deadline here, whatever that deadline is, and that's the unknown now.
Yes, I mean, as I explain in the Australian Foreign Affairs piece, what changed with Xi was not this lofty, but absolutely steel-hard intention that one day reunification will take place. That one day became very much closer when he said that we cannot leave this to future generations, meaning My generation, Mr. Xi Jinping's generation, is to bring the two together. Now, as I explain in the piece, it could be that it's sufficient that the two start speaking to each other on the political level. In other words, political talks about reunification would be initiated. And then in very Chinese style, Xi Jinping could claim that he set the process in motion. He can take the credit for going down in history as the person who initiated the actual process. The talks can then take, again, I think in very Chinese style, decades. They can talk and talk and talk, but the ball will be rolling. But what's of course important, the difference between Hugh and myself in thinking about how the ball will be set in motion, I very much think that Xi Jinping does not want war. He wants to avoid war, and he wants to use all means short of war to pressure the Taiwanese political leadership onto its knees to agree to talks. So the aim is not, with this pressure and with all the perhaps very ugly tactics that we might see, the idea is to create chaos within Taiwanese society so that the political leadership agrees to talks without preconditions. Because at the moment, both sides actually have preconditions, though the media always say it's only the PRC which has preconditions. Taiwan too has said that they will not talk before the PRC says very clearly that it will not use force to achieve unification.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned
that is a precondition in itself.
Yeah, well, I like the way you mentioned Chinese style. I didn't know how to articulate my thinking in that. I don't see China like Russia that will just invade and don't really care. I think China is much more sort of nuanced and sophisticated in the way that they go about things. And again, 95, they're genetically or ethnicity, their ethnicity is the same, practically 95% Han, and therefore you can't imagine China going there and bombing Taiwan. And I mentioned to Hugh is it's not like Ukraine where they can escape to neighbouring countries. They're trapped on an island with 25 million people. They can't go anywhere. So they're either going to be prisoners, or they can't be refugees leaving Taiwan. So I think that situation, the geography changes that. And plus, they don't want to go in there bombing. They want the technology as well. They want the semiconductor industries and all of that. So I think, as you say, the Chinese style will be much different, but they will still present a real strong force to be reckoned with, as you say, to commence talks. It's probably the best way I've seen someone sort of explain, not the war gaming, but the reunification game, the strategy of how it could happen. I suppose the next question is the response from the US in regards to that. There hasn't been a lot. You talked about the aircraft carrier groups going through the South China Sea. There's a couple in there now. And it hasn't been happening. Historically, America has been very sort of hesitant to be going in there. Do you see that potentially changing, their policy and their force posture in the South China Sea changing or ramping up from the US side? Do you see a need for that?
Well, because of the PRC's enhanced military capabilities, which have absolutely changed in quite a decisive way. And I think the other articles in the AFA describe those very well. The United States cannot, quote unquote, come to the defense of Taiwan in the way that was envisioned 10 years ago. That's how quickly things have changed. They can't just send an aircraft carrier in because of the capabilities that the PRC would have to wipe them out. So as I said a moment ago, I haven't quite been convinced of the argument that the United States would absolutely come to the defense of Taiwan, even though, of course, if they didn't, they would lose all credibility among their allies, Australia included, as an alliance partner, and of course would really lose credibility as a security guarantor in the Indo-Pacific. So this is a very, very tough question and decision for the United States president to take. But what kind of a war it would be, one also has to remember what you just said. Also geographically, Taiwan is immensely difficult to take. I think one of the articles by Brendan Taylor in the AFA also addressed this question. So it would be a very, very different military clash than what we're seeing unfold in Ukraine at the moment.
And I suppose the final question on this is, if China does reunify with Taiwan and they come to an agreement, how does that potentially change? Well, there's two scenarios. One is it's done through some sort of conflict and force, and therefore China has to really put forward its strength. And then how does that change the region versus the Greater Chinese Union approach, where it's done strategically and with what I would call common sense, maybe. How does that change China's posture in the region as well? If the reunification occurs, is that simply going to give China what it's want, the China dream, or do you see that that changes their thinking around the whole wider region as well?
I think a very key question, of course, Chris, is whether this happens, reunification, as two relatively equal parties. I mean, obviously, Taiwan wants to go into this as an equal party. That's one of their goals. Both wanting this in the Greater Chinese Union model, which I already back in the year 2000 with Gareth Evans came up with. Not only is it voluntary, but Taiwan would be neutralized with international guarantees, and the PLA, in other words, the People's Liberation Army of the PRC, would not be stationed on Taiwan. And there's a huge difference if the People's Liberation Army is stationed on Taiwan. Obviously, it then has a complete different access to the area east. So yes,
East Asia, basically.
Yes, than it does today. And for that reason, for the first time publicly, a US sitting official at hearings in the Senate said that it is not in the United States strategic interest to see the PRC hold Taiwan. This is what Chinese interlocutors have said to me over the last 35 years that have worked with China, that actually the United States does not want to see a reunified China. It's not in their interest, but they're paying lip service that they will accept it if it's peaceful. Yeah. Now, finally, at the very end of last year at these Senate hearings, the United States did say quite clearly that it wouldn't be in their interest to see the PLA on Taiwan. So it would change the whole strategic situation in East Asia, Chris, completely.
But as you say, the China style is to do it bit by bit, and eventually they play the longer game, and whether the US has that patience. And I suppose my last question is Australia's relationship with China. I like the way Hugh finished his article to say Taiwan's got to create, work on its own relationship with China, and so should Australia. At the moment, we don't seem to have a relationship that is moving forward. Any change in Australia's policy in relation to China and to recreate a relationship?
I very much agree with those words by Hugh. China Matters was founded and exists today with the strong belief that Australia needs a constructive relationship with the People's Republic of China. It is quite clear that they are a very important force in our region, and we need to have a working relationship with them.
Very good. Well, on that note, Linda Jakobson, Deputy Chair of the China Matters, thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see you at the next one here in Sydney. I've been to a couple, so they're quite good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.